Good morning. This is our first installment of Chapter 3, talking about supply and demand for the macroeconomics class 24001 for Fisk University. Kind of recap what we've been through in chapters 1 and 2 as we start to build out your toolbox. We've talked about, what is an economy, the economist, and then, economics itself. It's a social science. It studies choice. What differentiates it from other social sciences, its focuses on individuals in that, in the economy itself. They're concerned about opportunity cost. They are optimizers, and they make decisions at the margin. We also talked about a production possibilities curve, the PPC, and how that impacts factors of production. And again, just to go back, factors of production are things like labor, capital, and that could be capital infrastructure, could be financial capital. We talked about natural resources, which greatly encompasses land, and that is a significant factor for a lot of companies, is the land issue. And then lastly, it's the technology and entrepreneurship that goes into the production process. And all of these inputs go together, factors of inputs, they wrap up in the technology to generate outputs. We also talked about just what differentiates the production process. And organizations in an economy are producing output and then allocating that output. So they have to answer questions of what are we going to produce, what goods and services, how are we going to do it? Is it going to be manual? Is it going to be automated? What kind of technology we're going to use? What's the most efficient way to do it, which kind of goes into the how. And then for whom are we going to allocate? Are we going to sell or going to make available these goods and services? And some of them in a free market, it's, all other things remaining unchanged or considered unchanged. It's price that drives the allocation in a free market. There is some government intervention in every country, especially in the United States, that allocates services to underserved populations, which is better for the society as a whole. And then the last thing in the production process is, how do we preserve some of the current resources or factors of production to build out potential or future production in goods and services? So that's kind of a wrap up of chapter 2. And then what the authors are talking about in chapter 3, they start delving into supply and demand and how that all interacts in the economy. And I found over the years, especially either as an adjunct professor, as a teaching assistant at Ohio State, that the basics of supply and demand are the fundamentals or the foundations that most students struggle with. How that demand curve shifts, how that supply curve shifts, what the impact is on prices, and what's the impact on quantity produced. And in the economic environment, we're talking about supply and demand. It's on the XY axis. So, and typically it's portrayed price on the Y axis or the vertical axis, quantity is on the horizontal or the X axis. So that's kind of the framework of the model. And the really important thing to understand is, and the authors delve into it a little, is what is a market? And a market in economic terms is simply an organization that brings buyers and sellers together, and they exchange goods and services. You've got buyers that are interested in buying services. You've got sellers that are interested in selling services, maybe for monetary value, maybe in a barter economy, but they're bringing these individuals together for the creation of a, quote, market. And if you stop and think about the economy in the world today, you hear on Fox Business, they talk about, oh man, the market is really moving today, and the market's going up and the market's going down. What market are they talking about? And for the most part, if you're talking about financial news, they're talking about markets like New York Stock Exchange, S&P 500, NASDAQ, and that's more the selling of stocks and paper type financial products. If they're talking about, you're in Chicago and you're interested in agricultural commodities, You may be talking about Chicago Board of Trade or the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Think about the last time you went to a farmer's market. That is an organization that is bringing buyers and sellers together for the opportunity to buy and sell fruits, vegetables, handicrafts, especially around Christmas. If you've ever been to Berlin and gone to Christmas market, or Vienna and the Christmas market, there's just a lot of markets that bring these buyers and sellers together. And one of the markets that most people don't even think about is the market for healthcare. And what is the market for healthcare doing? It's bringing buyers and sellers together for the opportunity to either buy or sell healthcare goods and services. If you think of Meharry Medical Center is a seller of goods and services. Fisk University, as an employer group, is a buyer of healthcare goods and services for their employees, for their students. And the market that may bring them all together is the healthcare market. And that could be a health plan such as, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee, could be United Healthcare, could be Aetna, could be Cigna. A lot of health plans out there that are bringing buyers and sellers together of healthcare goods and services. And as we talk about the economic tool and the supply and demand model, and as I said, it's usually sketched out on an XY axis. We need to kind of simplify it, or at least simplify our thought process of how this works. And there's several things you have to think about. In a market economy that economists use on the supply and demand curve, or the supply and demand model, they make several assumptions. There are unlimited buyers and sellers. There's freedom to seek best price, price flexibility. They are not talking about a monopoly or an oligopoly where there are a small number of sellers and they drive price, or there's a small number of buyers and they drive price. It's not like in a small community, and you're talking about healthcare services, you may only have one hospital in town, and one hospital in several miles within the area. And that hospital is going to drive the prices that they pay for nurses and clerical support and all of the factors of production that go into producing those healthcare goods and services. So the assumption that's made in the economic world to simplify the complexities of all of these factors of production and all of these factors that are impacting the buyer's expectations or the supplier's expectation, they try to simplify it by saying there's many buyers and sellers, there's freedom to seek the best price, there is price flexibility, and there are no, I won't say laws, but let's say laws and regulations. There's no government interaction. There's no price floors, price ceilings being set. No laws or regulations that determine how the product is produced. And in that vein, all suppliers or all sellers are selling the same commodity, the same goods and services. In other words, they can't go out and provide a enhanced good or service. So if you're talking about students seem to like their coffee, so when you're talking about the supply and demand curve, you're talking about just a environment in which coffee is sold. No Starbucks woo-woo coffee. McDonald's has their own version, Dunkin' Donuts, Peet's Coffee. There are hundreds of mom and pop shops, huge corporations that are trying to enhance and trying to incentivize buyers to buy their product over somebody else's. But in the very simplistic model of supply and demand, we're making the assumption that sellers are all selling the same commodity. And one thing that you'll notice as we go through this supply and demand model, the demand curve is sloping downward. The supply curve is sloping upward. They are both at a 45-degree angle, and that's because of this price flexibility. And we'll get into it a little more as we go through supply and demand. But where they intersect is kind of the equilibrium price. but they are sloping downward, and that means that the slope of the curve is a 45-degree angle. So the change in Y, so which would be the change in price, the impact of the change in Y is proportional to the impact of the change in the quantity demanded. So really simplified, really simplification of a model. Supply and demand, the curves are, the slopes can vary. It's just it's a simplified model that is very important, and it's a very basic model that allows economists to investigate or to develop hypotheses, test those hypotheses, hopefully turn them into theory, and ultimately move them more toward a, quote, law. And if you remember in chapter 1, I think it was, we talked about how economists develop theories. If they test them enough times and there is no issue with the hypothesis, it turns into a theory. And if you test it universally and there is no issue with the hypothesis / theory, then it becomes accepted as a law. And that's kind of wrap us up with this introduction, this first segment to chapter 3. And I'll be back in a few minutes, and we're going to jump right into the second segment, and we're going to talk about demand. Talk to you soon.